Mga burayo!
Gumuho ang malalaking impact ng bato at lupa sa bundok.
6 ang nasawi sa magkakahiwalay na landslide sa Benguet at Baguio City.
3 na ang kumpirmadong patay sa pagguhong dulot ng bagyong Marin.
2 naman ang namatay sa magkahiwalay na landslide.
5 batang magkakapatid ang patay sa landslides.
3 bata ang natabunan ng putik sa barangay Ambyong sa La Trinidad, Benguet.
A deadly killer.
Everything has an origin. We can also say that everything happens for a reason. Even disasters such as tsunamis, wars, earthquakes, global warming, volcanic eruptions, and landslides have an origin. But in order for such disasters to happen and how to stay safe from it, we must first identify how it happens and what causes it. Hazards are everywhere. At first, you might not recognize those dangers in your area, but choosing to get informed and familiarize oneself, one can avoid these hazards that might end up into a disaster. Hazards are of natural origin and are related environmental and technological. Such hazards arise from geological, meteorological, hydrological, oceanic, biological, and technological sources, sometimes acting in combination. In technical settings, hazards are described quantitatively by the likely frequency of occurrence of different intensities for different areas, as determined from historical data or scientific analysis. But what is hazard? To put it simply, a hazard is any object, situation, or behavior that has the potential to cause injury, ill health, or damage to property or the environment. Hazards are potentials for damage to man and his environment that may result from the occurrence of natural events such as volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, floods, and storm surges. An event per se does not constitute a hazard. For example, without a threat to a population, the eruption of an isolated volcano remains an event. But when volcanic activity occurs close to or right at the center of a populated area, a mere event becomes a hazard. To enlighten us further, here are some examples and types of hazard. The first one is physical hazard. These are the most common hazards and they include extremes of temperature, ionizing or non-ionizing radiation, excessive noise, electrical exposure, working from heights, and unguarded machinery. For example, explosives, flammables, oxidizing, gases under pressure, and corrosive to metals. The next one is mechanical hazards. These are usually created by machinery, often with protruding and moving parts. For example, crushing, shearing, cutting or severing, entanglement, drawing in or trapping, impact, stabbing or puncture, and many more. Next is chemical hazards. These appear when someone is exposed to chemicals. Some are safer than others, but for people who are more sensitive to chemicals, even common solutions can cause illness, skin irritation, or breathing problems. For example, are paints, drugs, cosmetics, cleaning chemicals, degreasers, detergents, gas cylinders, refrigerant gases, pesticides, herbicides, diesel fuel, and many more. Next is biological hazards. These include viruses, bacteria, fungus, parasites, and any living organism that can infect or transmit disease to human beings. Next is ergonomic hazards, including the considerations of the total physiological demands of the job upon the worker, even beyond productivity, health, and safety. For example, objects, environment, and systems that result in poor posture or unnatural, uncomfortable, or awkward movements. Next is psychosocial hazard. This may arise from a variety of psychosocial factors that people may find to be unsatisfactory, frustrating, or demoralizing. For example, work-related stress, bullying and harassment, lone or remote working, violence in the workplace, both from staff and students, fatigue, and alcohol and drug use. Next is safety hazards. These are the most common and will be present in most places at one time or another. They include unsafe conditions that cause injury, illness, and death. For example, are spills on the floor or tripping hazards such as blocked aisles or cords, running across the floor, working from heights including ladders, scaffolds, roof, or any raised work area. So that concludes my presentation. So what we have learned today is that regardless of size or material, everything can be a hazard. That includes landslides, which is the main topic of our presentation.
Although we have a succinct grasp and glimpse of the concept and types of hazard, we will now discuss and understand an event or phenomena that instigate the very idea of a hazard and would even lead to a disaster, one of which is a landslide. So what is a landslide? Landslide is defined as the movement of a mass of rock, debris, or earth down a slope. However, geologists and scientists can classify this as mass wasting, as landslides open across a downward movement in which the Earth's surface is worn away under the indirect influence of gravity. Now, populated areas where landslides transpire can result in loss of lives and damage to properties. Debris flows or mudslides, on the other hand, is a common type of fast-moving landslide that tends to flow in channels. So what causes landslide? What causes this kind of phenomena to occur? There are three major causes of landslide, and there are geology, morphology, and human activity. Geology refers to characteristics of the material itself. A landmass, either rock or earth, weakens and breaks, or its layers vary strength and stiffness, resulting in shear stressors exceeding the strength that holds the slope intact. Morphology, on the other hand, refers to the structure of the land. For example, slopes that lose their vegetation to fire or drought are more vulnerable to landslides. Vegetation holds soil in place, and without the root systems of trees, bushes, and other plants, the land is more likely to shear away. Human activity, derived from the term itself, refers to human endeavors that cause slope instability. Human activities such as agriculture and construction can increase the risk of a landslide. Irrigation, deforestation, excavation, and water leakage are some of the common activities that can help stabilize or weaken a slope. So what are the different types of landslide movements? More specifically, what are the different types of landslide movements? In here we have four. Now these four terms are often interchangeable since this term shares the same characteristics or comes in series. For example, topples is where there is a rotation of a mass of rock, debris, or earth outward from a steep slope face. Heavy blocks of land such as boulders or rock tumble down a cliff or a steep slope. Now, falls is a type of landslide movement that is subsequent to topples. Hence, if a series of topples occur in a slope, it depresses the structure of a landmass and will begin to erode, causing that mass to fall. Translational slide. A translational slide occurs when a surface landmass separates itself from an underlying compact and stable land material. It is often subsequent to earthquakes as it shakes the top part of the land. Lastly, lateral spreads or flows. The term itself defines the lateral movement of a landslide. Earthquakes instigate this phenomenon as it moves the ground quickly, resembling a viscous fluid. Now, a translational slide can be a lateral spread, and a lateral spread can become a translational slide. Now, notice how the interchangeable play of these terms as the types of landslide movement. Now, there are areas at risk since land has been the residential house of humans. Unfortunately, instances, whether man-made or natural, trigger a landslide to occur. Now, there are some areas which are more likely to experience landslides, and that includes vegetation-depressed land areas, where these areas are places where wildfires or human modification of the land have destroyed vegetation. Landmass history is where landslides may happen in areas where landslides have occurred before. Steep slopes and areas at the bottom of slopes or canyons are frequent to topples and falls. Construction slopes are slopes that have been altered for construction of buildings and roads. Channels along a stream or river may also occur debris flows. And lastly, surface runoff are where areas is directed to runoffs.
Landslides have been known for taking the lives of people since ancient times. But just like any other disaster, here are some examples of the most destructive landslides in recorded history. The first one is the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens volcano in Washington State, USA. On May 18, 1980, an earthquake struck below the north face of Mount St. Helens in Washington State, triggering the largest landslide in recorded history and a major volcanic eruption that scattered ash across a dozen states. The sudden lateral blast, heard hundreds of miles away, removed 1,300 feet off the top of the volcano, sending shockwaves and pyroclastic flows across the surrounding landscape, flattening forests, melting snow and ice, and generating massive mud flows that took the lives of 57 people. And the last one is the mining-induced landslide at Naga in Cebu, Philippines. A large landslide struck Naga City, Cebu on September 20, 2018. The Naga City landslide killed 78 people and injured 18, while 6 others are still missing and considered dead. The majority of deaths were discovered around 1.2 kilometers from the 200-meter high head carp at the landslide though. This was owing to the landslide's surprisingly enormous volume and abnormally long runout, which caught residents off guard near the landslide's toe.
It's hard to underestimate the circumstances of a landslide incident occurring within your sphere, but being aware and prepared can also be part of one's character. So what do you do before, during, and after a landslide? Since a natural disaster like this can happen abruptly, there can still be actions taken to avert any unwanted repercussions. Like in a situation before a landslide, firstly, check and know if your place is a landslide-prone area. Learn and be aware as well of signs that may lead to a landslide. Landslides can be subsequent natural disasters, so it's important to monitor news or weather updates, warnings, and advisories. When events begin to go unwell, prepare your family's go bag, which comprises items requisite for survival. You need to be preparing ready-to-eat foods, first aid kit, clothes, flashlight, hygiene kit, radio, and most importantly, water. Make sure to familiarize yourself or know the location of the evacuation site as well as a safer and shorter route to get there. And upon receiving the go signal for evacuation, immediately evacuate to safer grounds. How about during? However, there can be instances where a landslide has already occurred and your location does not provide a safer exit. During a landslide, make sure to calm down and stay inside your vicinity. Go under a sturdy table and cover your head. If you're outside, however, avoid affected or vulnerable areas and immediately go to safer areas. When a landslide cannot be avoided, make sure to protect and cover your head with a hard hat or any protective head. And when you're driving, though, do not cross bridges or drive on damaged roads. It might require some time for an authority or an official to officially declare your areas to be finally safe and secure. Albeit, we can't help but worry and be anxious about the conditions of our relatives, pets, and important properties. So after a landslide, before going anywhere else, ascertain that authorities have declared your areas to be safe. Make sure to stay away and avoid areas that have a weak land foundation and are prone to landslides. If a landslide can be a result of another natural disaster, it can also be the cause of clogged creeks and rivers. Hence, be aware of possible flash floods in your vicinity. Check for missing relatives and persons and report them to the authorities. If you found someone injured or sick, however, bring them to the nearest clinic, healthcare unit, or hospital. If you've arrived at your house, check for any damages and repair them as necessary. And finally, report any signs of fallen trees and electric posts. Stay away from these areas and from places that have a lot of broken trees, electric posts, and wires.
Now that we've discussed the major concept, how it happens, and have given examples of a landslide, we hope that this would be of great help in understanding its origin, so that we'll know what to do before, during, and after a landslide. Thanks for watching this video and we'll see you next time.